Hello, good morning, afternoon, or evening, everyone, depending on where you are in the world. I'm going to speak a bit about W.B. Du Bois today, specifically his indictment in 1951 and some of the implications we can take from that particular happening, as well as Chinese support for Du Bois during that time, and vice versa. In 1951, W.B. Du Bois was indicted as an agent of a foreign power for chairing the Peace Information Center, and more specifically, for their circulation of the Stockholm Peace Appeal or the Ban the Bomb petition. As Du Bois explained in his understudied work in Battle for Peace, The Story of My 83rd Birthday, a book, by the way, I recommend that everybody read, the Peace Information Center was first attacked just 2 months after its formation by Secretary of State Dean Acheson on July 12, 1950. He called the Stockholm Peace Appeal a propaganda trick of the Soviet Union, thereby implying that those who circulated it were doing the bidding of the United States' staunchest enemy. In his reply to Acheson on July 14th, Du Bois not only defended the appeal as something that scores of world leaders had signed onto and millions around the world believed in, but also made the connection between aggression against China, the subjection of Black people in the United States, and anti-communism. He wrote, quote, "We have got to live in the world with Russia and China. If we worked together with the Soviet Union against the menace of Hitler, can we not work with them again at a time when only faith can save us from utter atomic disaster? Certainly hundreds of millions of colonial people in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and elsewhere, conscious of our support of Chiang Kai-shek, Bao Dai, and the colonial system, and mindful of the oppressive discrimination against the Negro people in the United States, would feel that our intentions also must be accepted on faith. Today in this country, it is becoming standard reaction to call anything communist and therefore subversive and unpatriotic, which anybody, for any reason, dislikes. We feel strongly that this tactic has already gone too far, that it is not sufficient today to trace a proposal to a communist source in order to dismiss it with contempt," end quote. Given Du Bois's adamant defense of China's self-determination, it is no surprise that comrades there were some of the first to come to his aid after he and other PIC members were indicted. They sent messages of support and signed on to the International Committee in Defense of W.B. Du Bois and his colleagues. Articles were published about his case in the Shanghai China News. Organizations like the All China Students Federation wrote letters of protest to the US government. And in fact, Du Bois wrote that, quote, "China knew of our plight before California," end quote. This was due in part to the strength of his international connections and because his New York-based defense committee understood the importance of globalizing this struggle. Here, they had the cases of the Scottsboro Boys, Rosalie Ingram, and many others as models. Such solidarity was remarkable since, as Du Bois noted, conquerors, including the United States, used the conquered to entrench their own immiseration and that of others. This was meant to preclude mutual comradeship among the racialized, colonized, and oppressed. He explained, quote, "Today, France is using the Black Senegalese to conquer Vietnam, and Britain has used troops of every race and hue to hold the remains of her empire. Perhaps worst of all today is the use of American Negro troops in Korea. Not only is this bound to leave a legacy of hate between yellow nations and Black, but the effect on the Negroes of America at being in a sense compelled to murder colored folks who suffer from the same race prejudice that Negroes in the United States have long suffered and still suffer, at being almost forced to be the dumb tools of business corporations seeking to dominate China and Asia. This is bound to result in the exacerbation of prejudice and inner conflict here in America," end quote. Thus, the mutual support between Du Bois and his comrades around the world, including in China, was invaluable to securing what he called interracial peace in a war-torn world. When Du Bois and his partner in life and struggle, Shirley Graham Du Bois, set out on a national speaking tour to raise awareness about his case among USians generally and Black folks particularly, Du Bois made sure to lift up US warmongering and aggression against China and the Soviet Union as the basis for the repressive atmosphere that led to his indictment. He explained, quote, The world is astonished at recent developments in the United States. Our actions and attitudes are discussed with puzzled wonder on the streets of every city in the world. Reluctantly, the world is coming to believe that we actually want war, that we must have war. It is American investors that seek to dominate China, India, Korea, and Burma, and who are throttling the starved workers of the Near East, the Caribbean, and South America. Today, in this free country, no man can be sure of earning a living, of escaping slander and personal violence, or even of keeping out of jail unless publicly and repeatedly he proclaims that he hates Russia. He opposes socialism and communism. He supports wholeheartedly the war in Korea. He is ready to spend any amount for further war, anywhere or at any time. He is ready to fight the Soviet Union, China, and any other country or all countries together, end quote. These connections emanated from Du Bois's keen understanding that his indictment was meant to prevent U.S. citizens from critiquing big business and U.S. imperialism, not least their efforts to make Asia a subservient colony subsidiary of U.S. industry. Not least their efforts to make Asia a subservient colonial subsidiary of U.S. industry, to expropriate African land, labor, and resources, to entrench U.S. control in the Caribbean and South America, and most of all, to crush socialism in the Soviet Union and in China. So I want to end by talking about some relevant takeaways from China's defense of Du Bois during his indictment and Du Bois's condemnation of U.S. warmongering in China and elsewhere. Not least because many of Du Bois's words about the anti-communist or anti-radical environment, about the saber rattling with China and Russia, about the repression of Black activism, really resonate with our current historical moment. So one of the takeaways is the imperative of waging internationalist campaigns against injustice, repression, and genocide, which of course relates directly to what's happening in Gaza right now, in Rafah, and that has been happening for the past 60 or since 1948, but has been intensified since October 7th. And here, relationship building is paramount to avoid abstract or facile proclamations of solidarity without any real material action. And this is something that Du Bois really conveys through the trips that he took to China, but also in his ongoing defense of the Chinese Revolution, of Chinese self-determination, and his ongoing correspondence with Chinese comrades, keeping abreast of what was happening in China, and in turn letting them know what was happening with the Black freedom struggle. The second takeaway is that war is the basis of so much of the world's ills, so we have to strive for peace no matter the cost. And as the Black Alliance for Peace explains, following the example of Du Bois and the radical Black peace tradition, peace is not the absence of conflict, but rather the achievement by popular struggle and self-defense of a world liberated from the interlocking issues of global conflict, nuclear armament and proliferation, unjust war, and subversion through the defeat of global systems of oppression that include colonialism, imperialism, patriarchy, and white supremacy. So here we're not talking about a kumbaya pacifism, but rather the struggle for the ending of all interlocking forms of domination. And it's only through this struggle that peace can be achieved. And Du Bois certainly understood this. Another takeaway is that hostile U.S. foreign policy is directly related to the domestic vitriol. And we see this, right, with, on the one hand, U.S. xenophobia is the direct material foundation of the anti-Asian violence that we saw peak during, at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. We also see that support for Israel is leading to increased Islamophobia and anti-Palestine racism here. And so Du Bois understood, as we ought to understand now, that there is a imbrication or a co-constitutionality of U.S. foreign policy and warmongering and the violence and racism and dispossession that happened domestically. Another takeaway is that attacks on China by the U.S. are part of a broader policy of global domination that finds world war preferable to multipolarity. And that current xenophobia manifested in various outside agitator discourses levied at anything from the campus protests to anti-war organizing. We saw this attack on various peace organizations in the New York Times, to Black uprisings during 2020, the claim that they were funded by China and Russia, and that they were full of outside agitators. But this is part of a much longer history of U.S. hostility toward China and the potential for Chinese Black solidarity and international solidarity more broadly. Another takeaway is that Black liberation requires international allies, especially those that are antagonistic to U.S. imperialism. And Black folks in the United States must in turn be in real material solidarity with struggles happening elsewhere. It is imperative that we engage in political education so that we do not believe State Department propaganda about places like China and Russia. And finally, belonging to organizations and collectives are invaluable to defense against state repression, because as we see, it was organizations that helped in China and elsewhere that helped to defend W.E.B. Du Bois and to internationalize his struggle. It was all of these committees that were formed in his defense that ultimately allowed Du Bois to be acquitted, right? So we can't rely on the capitalist courts, the imperialist courts to give us justice. We can only rely on building a mass movement and being part of organizations, and that is the basis of building mass movement. So I will stop there and thank you all for being here today.
I'm Michael Hudson. I'm appearing here for the International Manifesto Group. If you like this video and ones like it, please subscribe. For more information, go to the address on the screen.